They say that fire remembers the hands that first gave it life, that every spark carries a name, and every flame tells a story of something the world tried to silence. Tonight, I want you to remember one of those flames, a flame born not from rebellion alone, but from grief so deep it cracked the earth itself. Take a slow breath with me, in and out. Now close your eyes and listen. Imagine Bahia, 1874. The air is thick with sugar and salt, with prayers that never reach heaven. The wind carries the scent of burning cane, but beneath it, there is another smell, the stench of power, of human sweat turned into profit, of chains that rattle even in dreams. Here, the masters dine beneath oil lamps imported from Europe. Their laughter echoes through plantation house, carried by the same wind that drifts over the slave quarters, where mothers whisper lullabies to children who do not know if they will see another sunrise. And among those mothers, there was one. Her name was Rosa, though some say that was not her real name. In the record that survived, half burned, half forgotten, she is described only as a woman of dark complexion, tall, silent, unbroken. But her silence was not weakness. It was a sound of something ancient gathering strength. Picture her, bare feet pressed into red earth, back marked by whips that had long stopped bleeding, eyes staring not at the ground but the horizon, where the sun set behind a sugar mill that owned her life. That mill had a name too, Ingenio San Miguel. To the masters, it was a temple of wealth. To the enslaved, it was a mouth that swallowed lives. Every morning, the bell of San Miguel rang, and with it, hundreds of feet shuffled toward the fields, faces hidden beneath the dawn mist. Work began before the sun rose and ended long after it died. Cane after cane, sweat after sweat. The overseer's whip sang louder than the birds. And yet, even here, beneath the weight of empire, something survived. Stories, whispers, songs from across the ocean, tales of warriors who once fought with spears, of queens who ruled before chains existed. Those whispers carried from one generation to the next, like sparks passed between trembling hands. That is how rebellion begins, not with guns or shouts, but with memory. Now imagine Rosa's world on the day her story began. A sky heavy with heat, the smell of rain that never came. She was in the fields, her son nearby, a boy of maybe 7, strong for his age, carrying more than his body could bear. He was born in chains, but his laughter still broke through them, and that laughter annoyed the overseer. They said he laughed when he shouldn't have, that he dropped a bundle of cane and smiled when others wept, that he did not know his place. So the overseer decided to teach him, in front of everyone. Breathe, let the silence stretch here. The boy was forced into a shallow pit, dug for cane waste. Rosa begged. She fell to her knees, clawed at the dirt, screamed the boy's name until her voice cracked. But the overseer's eyes were cold as the blade on his belt. When the first handful of dirt hit the boy's face, she tried to rush forward. They held her down. She bit, she kicked, she cursed in a language older than the empire itself. But it didn't matter. The pit was filled, and by nightfall, the laughter that once defied the whip was gone. They said she was silent for days after, that she didn't speak, didn't eat, didn't sleep. She simply worked, moving through the fields like a ghost, until one night the silence broke. That night, the plantation slept beneath a full moon. The sea breeze carried the smell of salt and sugar. But in Rosa's hands, something glowed, a small flame stolen from the kitchen's hearth. They say she whispered her son's name to it before it grew. And when she walked toward the mill, that flame followed her like an old friend. Think about what it takes to reach that point. How much pain must one endure before mercy burns away and only justice remains? The Ingenio stood tall, a beast of wood and iron that had crushed thousands of lives into sweetness for the master's cups. It groaned and creaked in the night wind, like something alive. Rosa stood before it, her eyes reflecting the fire she carried, and she whispered, not a prayer, but a promise. I will not let the earth forget. Then she dropped the torch. The flames caught fast, licking up the wooden beams, swallowing the sugar, racing toward the sky. The wind turned red. The smoke rose like a black ghost, carrying screams and songs alike. The ingenio San Miguel, pride of the master, symbol of his power, became a pyre, not for sugar, but for memory. By morning, there was nothing left but ashes and whispers. And Rosa, she was gone. Some say she ran into the forest, barefoot and bleeding. Others say she walked into the sea. The records do not agree. But what they do agree on is this: the mill never rose again. And for years, people passing by that land claimed they could smell smoke when there was no fire. They said the sea turned red on certain nights, and that if you listened closely, you could hear a woman's voice whispering through the wind, not in grief, but in victory. Because sometimes the only way to be remembered is to burn what was never meant to forget you. By dawn, the horizon over Bahia was not blue, it was gray. Smoke drifted across the cane fields like a shroud. The ingenio that once gleamed white in the sun was nothing but a skeleton of charred beams. The birds did not sing that morning. Even the ocean, so close you could taste its salt, seemed to have gone still. The masters arrived in carriages drawn by tired horses. Their boots crunched on ash. Their faces were twisted with disbelief, as though the earth itself had betrayed them. How could a woman, a slave, destroy the heart of their wealth? They didn't call it vengeance. They called it blasphemy. And so, the hunt began. Imagine the sound of that pursuit. Dogs barking, bells ringing, rifles loading. The overseers, the soldiers, the priests, all moving together like a single vengeful beast. Every rustle in the cane, every flicker of shadow became a suspect. They searched the fields, the riverbanks, the hills. They promised rewards for anyone who could bring her back dead or alive. But Rosa knew those lands better than they did. Every trail, every stream, every hiding place carved by centuries of escape. She moved like smoke, here one moment, gone the next. They said she slept in caves, drank from the rain, ate wild roots and fruits that only the enslaved knew by name. And at night, she whispered to her son's spirit. Some swore they saw her near the ruins of Mill, standing among the ashes as if speaking to the dead. Weeks passed, then months, and for a time, people began to forget, until one night, a farmer claimed to have seen a figure in white walking near the old ingenio. He said she was holding something, a torch, though there was no flame. The story spread like fever, and soon the soldiers returned. This time, they did not come to hunt quietly. They came to make an example. Anyone who might have helped her, families, children, elders, were dragged into the town square. The priest read a sermon about obedience. The master stood beside him, his hands shaking not with fear, but rage. And then from the crowd, someone cried out, "She's here." Rosa stood at the edge of the square, no weapon in her hands, no fear in her face, just the same silence that had always followed her. The soldiers surrounded her. They shouted for her to kneel. She didn't. They struck her once, twice. Still she didn't fall. When they finally forced her to the ground, she said only one thing, words that, according to the few who dared to repeat them, made the soldiers hesitate. "You can bury me too," she said, "but you'll never bury the fire." They took her to the governor's house. There was no trial, only the illusion of one. A priest spoke of sin and forgiveness. A scribe wrote down words that were never meant to be read. And when it was done, a verdict was given before the sun had time to set: death by hanging. The announcement spread across Bahia like another kind of fire. Some called it justice, others called it fear. And in the slave quarters, beneath whispers and tears, it was called freedom with wings. Close your eyes. Imagine that square again, lanterns flickering, shadows stretching long across the cobblestones. A crowd gathers, not out of curiosity, but out of something heavier, something like shame. They came to watch her die, but they couldn't meet her eyes. The rope creaked. The priest murmured a prayer. Rosa stood still, back straight, gaze fixed on the horizon, and before the trapdoor opened, she whispered again, "Remember my son." Silence, then the sound of rope. But here's the thing about silence. It doesn't last. When dawn came again, people swore they smelled smoke in the air, though no fires burned. Children said they saw footprints of ash leading from the gallows to the ruins of the mill. And in the nights that followed, dogs refused to go near that place. The masters rebuilt, or tried to. A new mill rose where the old one had stood, but every time they began production, something happened. Cane burned before it was cut, wagons overturned. A worker's hand would slip into the gears. By the third year, the land was abandoned. They called it cursed ground. The records of her death exist. The documents are real, written in the elegant ink of empire. But the rest? That belongs to legend. And legend, unlike history, does not ask permission to survive. Breathe. Now, step back from the story. What do you feel? Pity? Anger? Awe? Because this is where history and truth diverge. Empires write about power, but people remember pain. And Rosa's story is not written in books. It lives in the smell of sugar and smoke, in the songs of those who still whisper her name at night. She became a ghost, yes, but not one of fear. She became a symbol, a warning, and a prayer. There's an old saying in Bahia, one you won't find in any archive. Be careful when you plant sugar in cursed soil, for fire may rise instead. Centuries later, the locals still point toward the coast on certain nights and say, "Do you see that light?" And they whisper, "That's Rosa walking, still searching for her son." History, they say, is written by the victors, but victory is just another word for silence. For years, no one spoke Rosa's name. Her death was not recorded in the local church ledger. No grave was marked. Her son's pit was filled and paved over with stone. The overseer was transferred to another plantation. The master rebuilt his fortune. And the priest, the same man who had blessed the rope, wrote sermons about forgiveness and divine order. The story of the woman who burned the ingenio was whispered only in secret, passed like contraband through generations, by midwives and washerwomen, by men who had once been slaves and now worked the docks, by children who had never seen chains but still felt them in their dreams. Imagine the weight of a memory forbidden to exist, a story carried in the dark, kept alive in rhythm, in song, in silence. That is how resistance survives, not always in fire, but in whispers that refuse to fade. And so, Rosa's fire did not die. It changed form. It became rhythm. The syncopated beat of drums in the candomblé temples of Bahia. It became colored red and gold cloths tied around wrists during the festival of Yemanja. It became voice. In the old song sung by women washing clothes at the river's edge. They didn't sing her name. They didn't need to. The rhythm knew it. Now, let's move forward in time, a century later. The world has changed, or at least pretends it has. Empires have fallen. Slavery has ended, on paper, but the soil still remembers. In Bahia, construction workers digging the foundation for a new road uncover something unexpected. Charred stones, fragments of iron, and deep beneath the earth, bones. At first, they thought it was just an old ruin. Then they found pieces of a gear from a sugar mill, and beside it, a child's small skull. Take a breath. Imagine being the archaeologist in that moment, brushing centuries of dust from a bone that once belonged to a boy the world tried to forget. In the official report, there's no mention of Rosa, just remains consistent with the 19th century period of enslavement. No emotion, no context, just silence and bureaucratic ink. But one of the workers, an old man from Sano Amaro, refused to let it go. He told the young archaeologist a story his grandmother used to whisper when he was a boy. He said, "They buried a child here once. His mother burned the mill to the ground." The young men laughed, but the old man didn't. He just looked at the horizon and said, "Sometimes the ground remembers better than books." And maybe he was right, because that year, for the first time in living memory, people in that region began leaving candles by the old ruins. Just one or two at first, then dozens, then hundreds. They said it wasn't religion. It was remembrance. No one organized it. No one preached it. It simply happened. A ritual born from silence. A fire reignited by those who never knew her, but somehow felt her story in their bones. Think about that for a moment. A woman erased by history books is remembered not by her name, but by the emotion she left behind. Grief turned to courage. Fire turned to light, loss turned to legend. And that is the paradox of oppression. The more power tries to bury a story, the deeper its roots grow. But here's the part that should make us all uncomfortable. Even now, Rosa's name isn't taught in schools. You won't find her in history textbooks in Brazil, not in American classrooms either, not in documentaries made for television. She lives only in stories like this, told by those who refuse to forget. Ask yourself, why? Why do societies erase the people who showed the most courage? Why do we remember the names of kings, colonels, and empires, but forget the woman who turned grief into justice? Because her story is dangerous. Because her fire was not just literal. It burned the illusion of control. It burned the idea that some lives were worth more than others. It burned the comfort of the powerful. And even today, centuries later, we can still feel the heat of it. Close your eyes again. Imagine Rosa standing before the mill, the torch trembling in her hand. Now imagine the same torch pass through time, from her hand to yours. What would you do with it? Would you carry it? Would you hide it? Would you dare to let it burn again, this time against forgetfulness? Because every story like this demands a choice. You can listen and move on, or you can listen and remember. And maybe remembering, truly remembering, is the first act of rebellion we can still make. Take one last breath with me, in and out. Now open your eyes, not to the past, but to the present, because Rosa's story does not live in 1874 anymore. It lives here, in the air you breathe, in the soil beneath your feet, in every act of resistance that begins as a whisper and ends as a flame. Pause. Think of how many times the world has told someone like her, someone like you, to stay silent, to forgive, to obey, and how many times silence itself became unbearable. That is where all revolutions begin, not in speeches, not in battlefields, but in the quiet space between grief and courage. Rosa lived in that space. She made fire out of it. And maybe that's why, even centuries later, her fire still burns. Not in mills or plantations anymore, but in classrooms where young girls ask about their ancestors, in marches that demand justice for the forgotten, in the art, the drums, the rhythm of those who know that remembering is a kind of defiance. Let's walk together for a moment through the ruins of São Miguel. There is nothing left of the walls now, only stone, moss, and wind. But if you listen closely, you can still hear it. The crackle of burning wood, the sound of chains melting, the cry of a mother who refused to surrender her grief to silence. Now imagine that sound blending with the hum of modern cities, cars, trains, sirens. Different noise, same heartbeat, because the same systems that buried Rosa's name still bury others today. Different faces, different chains, same fire waiting for air. Pause again. Let that thought settle. When we say her name, when we tell her story, we're not just remembering, we're rebuilding. We're turning ashes back into voices. And in doing so, we confront an uncomfortable truth, that history does not stay in the past. It echoes, and it asks every generation the same question. What will you do with the fire that was passed to you? You can see it, can't you? That small flame at the edge of darkness. The same one Rosa carried in her hands. The same one that survived smoke, silence, and centuries. If you hold it gently, it will not burn you. It will guide you. It will remind you that no matter how powerful the empire, no matter how long the silence, memory always finds a way to speak. And when it speaks, the world listens. Because every name forgotten is a story untold. Every story untold is a wound unhealed. And every wound unhealed keeps the fire alive. Now, think of Rosa's son, the child who never had a chance to grow, to speak, to live. In every act of resistance, his voice rises again. Every time someone says enough, he breathes. Every time someone lights a candle for the past, his laughter returns. And every time someone refuses to look away, his story, their story, is reborn. Let's not rush this ending. Let it breathe. Imagine the ocean near Bahia at dusk, the sun sinking low, the sky bleeding red and gold. The waves carry whispers, songs older than slavery itself. And on the shore, a woman stands. Her face is lost to time, but her silhouette is unmistakable. She's holding something glowing, not a torch this time. A light, soft, enduring. And if you look closely, you'll see that she's not alone. Behind her, countless others walking out of the shadows, each carrying a light of their own. That's what Rosa's fire became. Not destruction, not revenge, but illumination. The kind that forces the world to see what it tried to bury. History tried to silence her. We are her answer. Pause once more. So when this video ends, don't let the story end. Carry it, share it, talk about it, whisper if you must, because silence is a master's weapon. And memory is ours. And one day, when someone asks you why you care so much about stories that happened centuries ago, tell them this. Because every forgotten fire leaves the world colder. Take one last breath, in and out. Now you know the story of Rosa, the slave who burned her master's mill after they buried her son alive, the woman who turned grief into justice, the one whose fire refused to die. The night chains turned to flames,